The last little piece I want to talk about in this section is the role of classic literature on Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan got or was awarded a Nobel Prize in Literature in 2016, and in conjunction with receiving the Nobel Prize, he gave a lecture to discuss the origins of where he thinks his songwriting came from. One of the most interesting parts of that lecture came from him describing his literary influences. So he talked about, for example, Herman Melville's Moby Dick, which was a story full of scenes of high drama, dramatic dialogue, abstract goals of the main character, religious allegory, stereotypes, pagan references, myths, geographical knowledge. Dylan was particularly inspired by the grandiosity of the writing, so phrases in Moby Dick like, the path to my fixed purpose is laid with iron rails, wherein my soul is grooved to run. So very sort of grandiose language, and the example I want to use for this is Shelter from the Storm. So take a look at this first verse and notice some of this grandiose writing that maybe is sort of kind of like a Herman Melville work of literature. So in addition to Moby Dick, he also talked about being influenced by All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque, which is a book that Dylan characterized as a book where you might lose your childhood, sort of the end of the innocence kind of thing. It's a story about the brutalities of war, defending yourself from elimination. It contains accounts describing the psychological states of feeling like a cornered animal, the loss of innocence, graphic explorations of chaos, and basically the ugliness of the world. Take a listen to the next two stanzas from Shelter from the Storm. I'm using the same song as I illustrated Herman Melville's Moby Dick influence, but I think it's interesting how these literary themes are kind of emerging in this song. And notice how these next two verses sort of depict Dylan as this outcast and doomed to the worst of fates, kind of drawing off of that All Quiet on the Western Front kind of vibe.
Was burned out from exhaustion, buried in the air, poisoned in the bushes and blown out on the trail, hunted like a crocodile.
So what can we learn from this classic literary thread in Dylan's writing? Do we all need to write based on classic literature in order to write amazing songs? Well, I mean, certainly if you want to write Dylan-esque type of songs, classic literature is a good place to draw some influence. But I think a bigger takeaway from this particular section is just that great writing is great writing. So read a lot, and if you find yourself inspired by any kind of written work, don't be afraid to incorporate that into your music, especially if you're trying to push the envelope. So I said, like in section 1, you should have some influences and you should draw from those influences. Well, one way to put your own spin on it is to kind of like Dylan did. So you draw from another tradition, another work of art, another craft, and you bring those influences in and merge those into the things that you already know how to do from the original tradition that you're working within. So that can be a really interesting thing to try to do. But anything that inspires you, it could be works of fiction, it could be contemporary material. It could be stuff that maybe you listen to a lot of news or read the paper all the time, or you're very knowledgeable about history, or you're very knowledgeable about whatever it is. You can draw that stuff into your songwriting and add another layer, another area of depth that maybe other people are not incorporating into their writing. Okay, so we covered a lot of material in this series. I hope this information was useful to you. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those in the comments below. I'll try to get back to you. Just as a quick recap, we observed that songwriting can be considered a continuation of an existing tradition, and that you don't need to start with a blank canvas. That was in section 1. In section 2, we got into the idea that in order to write like Dylan, we have to be courageous and we have to be willing to explore the contents of our own consciousness with kind of a fearlessness and a willingness to be vulnerable and to put ourselves out there with our complete 100% truth and candor, for better or for worse. And then in section 3, we got into how we can use poetic device, literary influence, and also tricks with form to mask the meaning, hide the meaning, or present things in a more palatable way, especially if we're trying to be really emotionally vulnerable or to tackle really complex, difficult subjects songwriting wise. We can approach those in a more nuanced way, so we don't write stuff that's just over the top or difficult to digest for the listener, and also just overly vulnerable for the performer. I hope you really enjoy this material. Just whatever nuggets of wisdom you take from this, remember that Dylan said, if a song moves you, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter what it all means. If it sounds good, then it's good, and you want your songs to sound good. Hey guys, I hope you really enjoyed the video. If you're into this kind of content about songwriting, please go ahead and subscribe to this channel. There's going to be plenty more posted over time, and you'll get notifications also if you hit the little bell icon to know when there's new material. Also feel free to check out my website, www.songwritingresources.com. There's a blog post that goes along with the video presentations that has a lot more depth of content. So if you want to check that out and get even a little bit more information sort of synthesized and written in a sort of organized way, feel free to check that out, www.songwritingresources.com. Have a nice rest of your day. Take care. Bye.